Hey, this is Kip Weston. I've had a lifelong fascination with adventure. I'm obsessed with uncovering stories from extraordinary people. People who break from the average and become outliers. And I want to share their stories with you. Today's guest is Aaron Hill. Aaron is an entrepreneur, coach, and former UK Special Forces. I really enjoyed this podcast because it was great hearing Aaron's reflections on a career spent in the military and his transition to an entrepreneurship journey outside of the military. Aaron covers a lot of his life lessons in his podcast, Forging Resilience. I've linked that and other socials below. If you're interested in business and personal development, this is a great podcast for you. So let's get into it.
First question I wanted to talk to you about is your opinion of resilience itself. I liken it to stress in that my most stressful day of my life is going to be so different from your most stressful day of your life. And my neighbor down the street, their most stressful day is going to be completely different, but they're all going to be our most stressful day. Is resilience similar in that we all have this set idea of how resilient we can be based on how far we've been pushed in our lives?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. You're exactly right, and it's relative to us and our circumstances and where we are, especially sometimes on any particular day as well. But I think there's a lot of things that we can do to support ourselves. So for me, resilience is, in its most simplest form, bounce back ability. And for me, it's not a big scientific thing. And the reason that I like to use the word resilience is just, I discovered that is what I am. We'll get onto this when we talk about the military, but I discovered that I was very resilient. I'm good at coming back from things, not necessarily particularly portraying a tough guy image or the soldier or the Royal Marine that I wanted to be all the time. I didn't have to be that guy. It's part of me. What I did recognize is I was very resilient. It's something that I clung to, could recognize lots of patterns through, and decided to explore a bit more. So yeah, definitely it's relative to us, but there's lots of things that we can do, a bit like climbing, in terms of preparing ourselves ready for setback before it comes.
Yeah, in terms of your fitness, entrepreneurship, coaching, and military, where do you think you find resilience being the most helpful among those?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think I'd have to say right now, because it changes as we change. In terms of the military, on a certain level, that was quite easy because we're surrounded by other guys. We've done lots of training. We've been through lots of different scenarios. There's always a build up and a progression, or at least 9 times out of 10 before doing a certain job or going to a certain unit. So it's fairly progressive. And it was never, you don't go straight from an easy climb to the world's, or soloing on the world's hardest climb. There is generally a progression. It's the same with that. So the military in that term was fairly easy. Given to which that my expression there was always a physical output for it. So I like to think of emotions as energy in motion. It's just trying to drive an action. So there's always some way to dispel or get rid of that energy and put it into something. Whereas with entrepreneurship, it's sometimes there's nowhere for that energy to go. So I can be sat on a sales call, for example, or making a presentation, feeling lots of stress, anxiety, or tension. My body's telling me fight or flight, but there's nothing really to fight. And there's not going to serve me or the people that are sat in front of me if I start running. So it's being able to process that without it going anywhere. So that's it's probably, I find it more challenging sat as a coach, head of my company, than I have done any other time. So it's a new type of resilience. It's an emotional resilience rather than there's nowhere physical outlet to let go of it.
That makes sense. I mean, when we think about the purpose of stress and why we get stress, your work in the military is probably closer to that animal brain intent
of
those endorphins, right?
Yeah, a lot of the time, just like when you're climbing it's there to focus you, to give you that little bit of energy that you need to make that next move. But in the office, sending an email or having to have a tough conversation with your boss or a colleague or somebody else. So it's about what do we do with those emotions? How do we allow them? How do we process them, or rather than distract them or succumb to them?
Yeah. What drew you to the Royal Marines?
Yeah, great question. Probably they had the most influential marketing campaigns at an age where I was very influential.
That's a very honest answer. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I was around 14, 15, 16 when I started to see the announcements in the magazines that I read in terms of mountain biking or fitness or just even around like school displays and careers fairs. So that's why I really started to spike an interest, and it seemed like a big challenge, and I was ready for a big challenge. So that's why.
When you grow up in England, are you growing up among stories of King Arthur and these knights and warriors? And like, I would imagine playing in the backyard, you'd always want to be a soldier of some way.
Yeah, you're right. I had, but I think the only person before me was my grandfather. Otherwise, there's no real connection to the military, and he never talks about it, as most guys who served in the Second World War didn't. I think for two reasons. First of all, he didn't like talking about it, and secondly, he felt he didn't do that much where he was posted at the time. But there wasn't a lot of. It's not what would strike up an image of Second World War for us. So I never really spoke to him about that. So military games weren't really, there's no that much talk around the military. There's a little bit of interest, and as like in where you're from, it gets talked about or can be held in fairly high regard by some people. Not like in Europe, for example, or in Spain, it's not always seen like that. So yeah, it was held in quite high regard. And yeah, as a young lad, I was used to run around playing soldiers out in the woods, in the garden. Yeah, and I never really grew out of that.
Yeah. Is that an excitement because you said you're 16 joining the Marines?
Yeah, well, I joined at 18.
18,
I wanted to join at 16. My parents requested that I got a bit more of education and a bit more time under my belt, which is a wise thing to do as a young, immature 16-year-old, if I'm brutally honest. So
is your cohort you joined with similarly aged? Like all young men, 18 around there?
Yeah, around that. There's a few older guys. A few lads had served in other units, the parachute regiment being one of them. But yeah, we're all roughly around the same sort of age, just young guys.
Yeah. Is there that interesting dynamic? I have some friends that went out right after high school, and they, on one level, are hyper disciplined when they're in public events, and then it turns into a pressure cooker when they're in their barracks alone, or it just turns into roughhousing. Like you're growing up with a bunch of 20 other brothers almost.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and especially when there's drink involved. So yeah, and I think that's part of the cultural bonding thing. It's just when you spend so much time with certain people, there's that level of trust or connection, and that's how you start to behave around each other, as well as they recruit from a certain, or they look for a certain profile or attract certain profiles, and that's just the way some of us acted and behaved in a group, which was great. I loved it. There's lots of things I probably wouldn't do if I went back, but yeah, they're done. It's all great experiences.
And did you have a very disciplined childhood growing up, or was the military discipline new?
No, I did have a very disciplined childhood. My parents are Christian, so they brought me up quite, I wouldn't say strictly, but quite sheltered, but from a loving perspective. Yeah, it was fairly disciplined. We were taught what was right and wrong until the age of probably 15 or 16, where we could make the choice if we wanted to continue going to church, and I didn't. I don't think my brothers and sisters did either. But yeah, I don't regret that. I think they've taught me some really important values, regardless of what religion or type of spirit or your spiritual beliefs. There's some important value lessons there that I probably still carry now. But yeah, I had a fairly strict but loving upbringing, luckily.
Yeah, and you'd know better than me, but so please correct me. I see the purpose of military training is they break you down, right? And then they rebuild you into the soldier model. And I wonder if your experiences when post-training and they've wearing you down, do you see your truest self in those moments?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think you see different parts of yourself. It can break some people down, literally. I mean, it broke me. I had stress fractures in my foot from training, and I had to go into a medical holding point before carrying on. But you know what? I don't read too much into it, Kip. I mean, you could understand how it might, on one side, break people down and build them up to be the models or closer to the machines that they want, or it could be, this is the task, this is the event, this is the date. Then the next day, this is the date, this is the task, this is the event, and they're just a series of progressions. I think it depends which way you want to look at it. So, to be honest, sat here now, I don't look at it as either. It's just the way it is, and to get people to become soldiers, there's certain processes and things that they need to do to get them physically prepared and potentially mentally prepared to do the job that they need to do.
Yeah. Which was harder for you to prepare for, or in retrospect, was it the mental work or the physical work?
Yeah, probably the physical, because mental, because as a young lad, it's you can go do long runs, or you can do difficult workouts, or ruck a certain amount of weight on your back, but without that pressure from somebody in your ear or having to perform at the end of it, it's quite hard to simulate as a young lad on your own. So yeah, but it often comes, at least in the military, from my experience, at the end or during a physical challenge. Whereas now there's no physical challenges I have to go through, but I still get that big mental challenge. Yeah, which way do I go, left or right? What's the story I'm telling myself about this? What am I making this mean? How am I procrastinating or putting off this uncomfortable decision or conversation? There's no physical, I can't let that out anywhere, if that makes sense, in terms of this decision.
Right. Could you walk me through from enlistment to post-training? How long does that process take before you're officially in a Royal Marine?
Yeah, so the Royal Marines Commando training takes 6 months, thereabouts. So I had 4 months in rehabilitation. So with a bit of leave as well, it took me about 11 months to complete my training. And then passed out and went up to Scotland to serve for a few years, almost 5, before going onwards, which we'll probably talk about. But yeah, so it was, I didn't particularly enjoy training. It was challenging. I was around lots of lads that I wasn't used to being around, rough, tough, hardened lads from lots of different.
Not your Sunday crowd.
Not my Sunday school crowd, no. Although there was a few snuck in there, like myself. But yeah, I wouldn't change it, and I recognize now, looking back, that I'd always been a leader, but it's not because I was the loudest, but I had a certain ability to connect or communicate with people without necessarily being the brash in your face, which is not what I am.
That's an interesting thing to recognize, because I think a lot of people would think in the military it's the biggest, most loudest alpha man running around would be immediately drawn to the leadership role. Could you speak more on that?
I only from my opinion where I'm sat now, and I think it can be sometimes. Yeah, because in certain times you need to have that physical presence or somebody that has that ability to speak directly around the chaos. But other times it's really not. It's the ability to connect to somebody and get them to do the job that they need to do in their own way. It's like if talking about animals or kids, we can scare them into doing what we want to do, or we can educate and guide them into doing what we want them to do, or to teach them. And it's the same with the military. Is both ways work, which is both will have results. There'll be a price to pay, or in one, and there'll be a price to pay in the other. So I guess it's about finding which way works for you as a person, but also hopefully for the other person as well. Yeah. But it takes all sorts, Kip, to be honest. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a year after enlistment, you're 19 years old. Are you having ambitions yet of joining special forces? Do you have a career plan, or are you just a 19-year-old boy trying to figure it out?
19-year-old boy, yeah. So again, what I draw you back to is if I was at the day one of my training and imagine myself serving with the Royal Marines Commando unit, in this case 4-5, it would have been impossible. So I had to go through that process. even though I had a dream of finishing that. And again, with going to special forces, I might have had a dream as a young lad of going to special forces, but it would have seemed impossible to go to do that. So as with most people, I spent a lot of time listening to what was going on around me. The conversations, it's inevitable. These sorts of conversations happen with lads that have been in longer or been on different deployments or been exposed to more things. They come in contact with these types of opportunities and work and processes and even people. And it was just to get some experience. So that means just learning what you can, doing what the unit does, in terms of deployments or courses or opportunities. So that's really what I did until 5 years later when I chose to go for Special Forces selection. Yeah.
So it was excitement from hearing people around you talk about what that would mean to be a Special Forces is what drew you to it?
No, I think it's probably an ambition that I had when I was very young, if I'm brutally honest. You know, I can remember talking about this with my coach, you know, when we're talking about how did I create certain things, and we just happened to look at, or how did I create things in my life, and we happened to draw lessons that I created for myself in terms of get myself to a Special Forces selection. So I'd already been practicing or playing soldiers in my garden. It doesn't necessarily, it's not going to help, obviously, but I'd also been 16, 17, before I joined up as 18 as well. Instead of drinking every Friday night, I did drink a lot Friday nights, but I might have been out walking with weight on my back. You know, I was practicing. They're all tiny little steps that was taking me closer to do something that I wanted to do. So it had probably always been a dream, but it wasn't until that I had a certain amount of experience that I felt confident in my ability, at least to go and do the course. Whether I passed it or not wasn't up to me, but yeah. So it's a process, I think.
Got it. So you're almost getting onto the racetrack and someone starts waving the flag and you're like, okay,
Yeah,
now I can go for it. See it.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Or you get closer to the racetrack, or you get to do one lap and you get to do 10 and you see a Formula One car go past, which would be Special Forces. And then, wow, that's incredible. How could I ever? And then before you know it, you see them in the pits, you get to talk to them. They might tell you a little bit about it. Somebody that served comes back, talks about it, you know, so you get closer and closer to this exposure. But in the UK, the process is fairly open, as we've talked about. I don't talk about it that much. There's lots of people that do. That's fine, but it's not a secret, really. As you know what you have to do, or at least very close. So there's no real tricks, at least when I was in.
When you say you know what you have to do you mean what you have to be physically prepared to do?
Or in terms of the idea, yes, although the idea of what that course looks like, how long you're here for, what's required, how long you're there for, what's required roughly. So yeah.
The whole selection process, you mean? More
or less, yeah. And there's lots of books out there, and some people speak about it very openly and will give lots of details, and that's fine. One of the reasons I don't is I don't want to misquote it. It's not something I go back and look at a lot or contemplated since I've passed. It's almost like that chapter's kind of finished for me. So I don't dwell on the statistics or the details, or even though I feel an immense sense of pride at what I managed to achieve.
Where do you think it comes from, that the sense of we don't want to talk about this so much? We don't want to have, I don't want to say, like, we don't want to market this about what we've done. It seems like a big cultural difference for me, because in the US, people seem pretty comfortable talking about or leveraging their military experience as part of their brand, perhaps. Yeah,
it's a really interesting thing. I mean, you'll notice that I do make reference to it, but it's not the front and center. I think there's so many things there, Kip. So I think one is that, as my upbringing taught me, follow the rules, do what you're told, don't challenge them, type of thing. So the rules there, we're not meant to talk about it. It's not seen in a good light to stand on the shoulder of giants and draw attention to yourself, because it's the organization that owns that, really, not you. So there's that sort of thing. Respect to the lads that are there, that are still serving, that have got their own challenges as well. there's a belief in me, which is something that I talk about quite a lot on my platforms, of self-worth and self-belief. Did I even deserve to be there? My brain used to tell me for so long that I wasn't good enough, that it was all a fluke. Everything that I'd done for 10 years, I'd been fluking my life for 10 years, 5 years before that, and 10 years after, so it's really easy to buy into that story. I'm not worth it. But for me, it's about using my own way of communicating that. And it just feels more aligned to me to talk about who I am, not what I've done, or at least not all the time. Draw lessons and insights from that. I'm not hiding anything, but it's much more, I believe, for me, much more powerful to show who I am in the world now than a few things I did a long time ago, as the clock keeps ticking on 5 years of my life, or 10 years in terms of total military experience. So I hope that's covered a little bit of what you're asking there, mate.
Yeah, I think so. I do wonder though, when you try and divorce like from what you've done and who you are, I'd have to imagine going through a grueling selection process like that might affect who you are. And is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. But the thing is, I never believed that I belonged, because I was always looking, I felt like I wasn't good enough. And so if I go back in my life, it's quite easy now that I've done a lot of self-reflection. I've been coached. I've spent thousands of euros on my own personal development to understand who I am, so that I can speak to my clients without a muddied perception of my world or their world, just so I can hold space for them, not necessarily to speak to them. But so there's no doubt it will have an effect. But for me, it's much more important to be accepting of myself. So like I said, I felt I didn't belong. And it was really easy to find evidence there, was really what I didn't find, as I wasn't accepting of myself. So all my little mistakes I'd kept in a box and used those as evidence of I'm not good enough. And there's nothing gone wrong there, really. All the little mini failures that we collect as kids, to bigger ones, to things that I talk about publicly and in terms of my military service, that I used to carry that around with me as evidence of not being good enough, just because of that was the way that I saw the world. And it wasn't until I get to put those down that I recognized it's easier for me to separate myself. So if you go for a climb and you fail it time after time after time, does that make you a failure, or are you still working on your skills to be able to get up to the top of that pitch?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And as a great example of that, do you mind sharing your sniper selection school story?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I failed that course basically, and I wasn't in special forces when I failed it, but it was a real blow. It's a very challenging course to do, and it's a quite long course as well. And I remember progressing slowly and then dropping down a bit, progressing slowly, and for I passed all the shooting phase, which is done right at the beginning, and then it's the field craft phase that I was just going to say I let myself down, but I didn't meet the standard required to pass or to badge as a sniper. So that probably weighed on me quite heavily as well. Even though 50% of our course failed.
Yeah.
At a guess, it was a high percentage.
Right.
So yeah, that was a bit of a kick. But I think the interesting thing is, just because the standard was there and I didn't meet it, I learned so much whilst I was on that course from lots of other experiences, from lots of other experienced soldiers that were there as well. Yeah, is that the story you were getting at, mate? Was there
definitely
another component to it?
And I was hoping you could just maybe touch on what you think of as the difference between maybe a setback and a true failure.
Yeah,
like,
that's a good question.
Is that an example of like a time where you could practice resilience, or is that just a complete failure?
Yeah, no, I think failure for me now, again, speaking from where I'm sat today, because things could change tomorrow,
Right.
and 20 years ago it would have meant something else, is allowing myself to buy into a story around that event. So the separation here was for me, if we take that course as an example, am I a failure, or did I just fail the course? So I might not ever have to go back or might get the opportunity to go back and do that, but it's my ability to separate myself from the story, which is the challenge. So for me, a failure is buying into some sort of story that's keeping you grounded, or a negative loop or feedback or discussion around that. The words coming to me in Spanish, sorry, it doesn't come to me in English. But yeah, it's just caught in that loop. So I could go back again. So if I think about something more recently, what have I failed, quote unquote, recently? So I could take it back to when I left the military and went on to private security. And after private security, I was retrained as a personal trainer. And for me, speaking my second and third language, making sales was a challenge. I made it all about me because my language isn't good enough. I've only got this amount of experience. They're judging me. I failed myself because I was buying into the story at that time. When I managed to separate it and put my attention on the person, regardless of whether I made a sale or got to help them or not, I didn't make it about me. I was making it as the thing, a pen or the offer or the pitch that had failed, not me as a person.
Yeah, that's interesting. One quote I love is the idea of so iron sharpens iron, men sharpen each other. And then I wonder, is being in special forces, is there a caliber of teammate you have now that really brings out the best in you?
Yeah. So again, the guys that I've served with, all joined up with, most of them have left now because it's been that long. And forgive me on my maths, trying to pull my thumbs and fingers out here to count. But so I'm still in touch with a few of those guys. But again, most of my mentors and coaches and the people that I surround myself now draw out a different type of golden thread. They're not necessarily the guys that I used to work with at all, because it's a very different challenge to me now. But there's no doubt that when serving, being around certain people that are quite aspirational or inspirational characters, they've done certain things, or I had a certain aura or sense about them. So there's no doubt that we act differently or raise our game when we're around those sorts of people. And that's what I look to try and replicate now, but in a very different sense. They don't look like, they're not soldiers per se. They're people that are going to challenge me in a very different way.
Could you give advice for people who don't surround themselves with people that are perhaps the best for them? Like, if I want to find friends that bring out the best in me, what should I do?
Yeah, great question. Something that comes to me to say is don't wait for them to go and create them. So try new things, try new experiences. If you're let's use the climbing as an example, with all those ropes hanging, carabiners hanging behind you there. If your club isn't giving you what you need emotionally or physically by that way, then maybe rather than waiting for that new person to come in, you have to actually take some action, have that uncomfortable conversation, or go and look for a new group that's going to start to pull you up or help draw that new capability out of you by pushing you along, encouraging you, giving you what you need. But it's not an easy thing to do on our own, which is where my work as a coach comes in. But I have people do that for me. So it's a cyclical process as well.
Could you maybe distinguish the role between what the benefits of a coach are versus just a friend group in the space you're interested in?
Yeah, so in terms of a coach, there might not be the emotional connection or story. So poor old Kip, he can only climb this, or that happened to him in his life. I'd see you through a very neutral lens. There's no judgment there, and what we'd help you do is establish where you are and where you want to get to and what you need to do to get there. So it's quite strategic, but also a lot of exploring. So asking you some really quite difficult but simple questions to really reflect and come to your own answers, whereas friends generally give advice and their opinions. But if we consider that's coming through their muddied lens of the world or blurred lens, then they're only giving how they see it. The coach is helping you clean your lens to come to your own answers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think of it like a college admissions officer almost, where it's like, what do you want to do? What are you interested in studying?
Kind of, yeah, but I think there's a bit more time to build a rapport there. I
Yeah,
noticed a slight pause than you there, Kit. Was there something you're reflecting on in terms of like getting those golden threads drawn out of you?
a little bit. I'm also reflecting on conversations I have with my own friends where I am just spilling advice, maybe instead of pausing and asking more reflective questions for them.
Yeah, it's a great catch. Yeah, and I think a great piece of, if I was going to give advice, then it's listen to understand rather than listen to answer or to respond.
Yeah. I think of that in relationships too. Like my wife, for example, I think it's a cliche, but the husband's always trying to offer solutions instead of offer an ear.
Yeah, that's a great catch, and something that, again, I've been with my partner now for 20 years. We got married this summer. Yeah, I still sometimes forget to do that. We're all human, I think, and that's, for me, one of the great things when we get to work on ourselves. If we recognize that we're giving advice to our friends, chances are we're giving advice to everyone as well. And if we can, like you said there, hold that space and help ask reflective questions, it benefits everybody around us. They feel a lot more heard, understood, which helps connection, which helps all sorts of things. So yeah, it's a positive knock-on effect.
I'd love to talk about your coaching work and just your
Yeah.
entrepreneurship journey in general. In some ways, I feel a lot of the military, the qualities that make a good soldier transfer somewhat well, like self-discipline, discipline versus motivation, these kind of things. But entrepreneurship, on the other hand, I feel doesn't have that top-down guidance that maybe the military has, where you always are trying to pivot and figure out, how do I make something from nothing? How am I generating all these sales? Like, it's just so much self work, and you don't really have a mission handed to you. Was that a big transition for you?
Yeah, massive. And I think it's a continual journey. I really do. At least I see that from my perspective. So the support that I get from my coach is often not based around the strategy or the technical side of business. It's a lot to do with how I see it. What am I making that mean? And helping me set my own goals and tasks to be able to build that business. And it's a continual thing. And really, really hard to do on your own. Again, I'd go back to, if I was to give advice, it'd be to have us, in terms of starting business, have a support network around you that's going to hold you accountable to do the task that you don't want to, because it's so easy to get led astray and try and design sexy logos for Instagram, when really we should be picking up the phone and speaking to that client, or making that offer, or speaking to these people. There's all that big long list of things that we don't want to do, and there's a reason why, because we don't want to feel that, usually emotion. So that's why it comes back to me, why it's all about me. It's all about me. What am I making this mean? So yeah. Get some people around you to support you, know what you want, but then have people help draw that out of you.
Are there elements that do feel familiar to you? Like I imagine in your military experience is full of, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this.
Yeah.
I don't want to wake up early and work out and do this ruck, but I have to do it.
It's a really good question, but I think kind of. So the thing about the military is, that it's not only might you not want to do it, you're probably letting people down if you don't do it. So it's something that's come clearer to me over the last few months, again, because all this sorts of things, these sort of like learnings come in waves, is that I need to remember that I'm helping people, I'm serving people. So if I'm making this all about me, in the sense of I'm no good, I can't do this, then I'm not making myself available to help serve clients that need my help. My podcast, I was just going to write about this. I've run out of time today, so if I can get it out this week, in terms of, because I know you wanted to touch on this, but I had a message from a guy a couple of weeks ago saying, your podcast saved my life, literally. And it was a lovely message to get. He's a veteran. I spoke to another veteran, Azam Gurnau, who's an ex-Royal Marine as well, tried to take his own life through a suicidal incident, and he went on to form a charity, Save the Warrior Saw, and I think there's one in the States and there's one in the UK. And this guy heard that, looked them up, and managed to get brought into one of their cohorts and programs, which he attributes. Do you know? So there's an example. If I was making it about me, it's not good enough. Nobody's listening. If I didn't put that out into the world, it's just one tiny example. We never really know the knock-on effect of our work there. So it was a lovely message to receive, and I apologize because I can't remember what the point of that story was to your question.
No, yeah, it's that you've connected your work now to a greater mission.
There you go, a greater cause. So I am here to serve and help people. If I make it all about me, then it's too easy, to go to the logos rather than press send or pick up the phone or start a podcast, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. What was your inspiration for starting the podcast?
It just felt really, really uncomfortable. So I've used for quite a few years discomfort as my guide to either something that I can learn about myself, or it's like there's a desire on the other end of that. So part of that desire is to have interesting conversations with interesting people. Yeah, put that out into the world. Part of that is to dangle a bit of a carrot, because I get some really interesting characters sometimes to bite on that and appear on my podcast, and then I get to speak to them and learn something. And sometimes, just like with Adam and so many other people, there's a really important message to the work that they do. So that's what really inspired me. And what can I learn? So there you go. Perfectionism. I've been not crippled, but because I used to make everything about me. So if I failed my exams at school, I made that mean I was a failure. So there's a lot of resistance to putting work out into the world, because I assumed that there's judgment attached to it, because I was really judging myself. So it's just an opportunity to silence or quiet or appease that part of my brain and say, hey, you're all right. Let's put it out, see what happens, to make it about you. Again, that separation from the thing and myself. Yeah.
Was it tough speaking in front of a camera for you initially, especially even on your Instagram, the camera facing videos?
Yeah. I think I sent my mentor my first video that I did. The algorithm's changed now, so it doesn't get the whole video, but you can see the discomfort in my face. I had two young kids who hadn't slept well that night. It was like 10 to 7 in the morning. I had a cold sore. My eyes were baggy. My hair was sticking up. But that's exactly how it was meant to be. Yeah. It doesn't matter about what physically I look like. It's about me.
You didn't do the airbrush Kardashian?
Not that time. I do every other time, by the way.
Yeah.
No, it's just what it is. And I think it also shows a development or how I've changed. Again, you can see it literally on my Instagram. It's gone from physical and lifting weights and sometimes top off to just talking about coaching and what I've learned about myself, or something I've helped with my client with. So it shows a progression of me, and I think it's quite interesting to go back and look at that.
Yeah. No, I really loved watching your journey, and your first camera facing reel is fun to watch, like you said, because you do talk about like, hey, this is me pushing through something that's uncomfortable to do, and that's why I know I should do it.
Yeah. What about you? Do you find it uncomfortable or did you talking on camera?
It's so funny, because I think filming it and editing it is so cringe, and I hate it. And then the second I post it, I go, why isn't everyone watching this? This is the greatest piece of content. So it's funny going through that 180 of like, oh, this is so cringe, and then you post it and it feels like, oh, everyone should be watching this. I don't know if you feel that way, but
maybe not everyone should be watching it, but that feels good to get out there, you know?
Yes.
And sometimes there's real value in it. Sometimes it's just a bit of a car crash. But again, it's not about me. And you never know what that message might mean to just that one person, or even the fact that I've just spoken it out, got it out of me. But no, definitely. But that's the whole point. I think especially in terms of coaching and self-development, we assume that everything, or at least I did, assume everything's just going to become rosy and lovely after a few coaching sessions or challenging comfort here. But I've got a mate called Carl who talks about that every level there's another devil. So just because you've got past this level doesn't mean there's another ceiling where you're going to run into the same sort of challenge. So which is a great analogy. So
I love that. Could you talk about like fitness seems to be a through line throughout your whole life. Were you always into sports and
Um,
working out?
no, I think not really. I think I was very active and spent a lot of time doing sports, but not always training.
Yeah.
So I played sports all the way through school and college. I stopped when I joined up, probably. Um, and then it wasn't until, yeah, I guess that I was in special forces and I bought a motocross bike, and I did do a little bit of mountain biking. And it wasn't until I saw how unfit I was on the motocross bike that I started to train quite hard. And I'd always done gym session a little bit, but nothing serious. And it wasn't until I started working specifically on certain movements and cardio fitness that I could see the carryover onto my bike, which then I saw the benefit on my mountain bike, that really sparked an interest. And then several years later, once I got onto the circuit, as we call it, or the security industry, working in the Middle East, where we generally sometimes had quite a lot of time on our hands, that got into training, and CrossFit was just starting off at that time. So it wasn't until I was I came late to the party in terms of fitness, really, and specifically training. Yeah, but it's something, great example. Today's Monday. Yesterday I took my son and my daughter out for a walk. And 3 kilometers in, my son had crippling stomach pains. He couldn't walk. He was going through a little bit of a medical thing as well. So I was so grateful to have my strength and fitness that I managed to carry a little 30-kilogram boy out on my front, because of how much pain he was in, out of the woods back to obviously we're not very far away, but it made me think, yeah, this is really why I train, so that I can be active around my kids. It was a great reminder to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What a great, like you said, what a great reminder
And
motivator.
Yeah, no, definitely. I should give my coach a shout out here in terms of my personal, my strength coach, Andy McKenzie at Iron Mac Fitness, because he's the one that does the programming for me, and really knowledgeable. And it's his philosophy, fitness for life type of thing. It's great having looking great, but can you put it to use? And so it definitely answered that question the other day.
Were your security roles in the Middle East your first jobs out of the military and in the private world?
Yes, they were. Yeah. So I went straight from the military, spent a couple of weeks, maybe a month, trying to look for a job. And my parents just happened to move house at that time. And I spent those few weeks immersed in their property. Had quite a bit of land on it. It's all overgrown. So chopping down trees and cutting back all the bushes and the thorns and the grass. So it was a great fun. So yeah, I literally went straight from one job into the next, via my parents' back garden, and straight into security work. The same hot, dusty countries I went to in the military, but this time a bit better paid, but a lot more isolated. Yeah.
Isolated how so? The whole team isn't there with you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you generally out on your own. There is support, but it's nothing like we had in the military. And people come and people go in terms of in the security industry. You don't know everybody. I haven't got as much of a relationship with them. I still met some absolutely, excuse me, incredible guys. And again, not an experience that I change for the world. I really wouldn't. But yeah, in some of those places and locations, there's not. Backup isn't very close, and it was going to take a while. Whereas in the military, it might feel like that, but you had a powerful card to play if it did start to go wrong. Most times, at least when I was serving.
Is there a subconscious or fully conscious weight that comes with that then while you're working there?
Yeah, definitely. So if I talk about the private security work, yeah, definitely. I think I felt, especially as I had young kids. And the places that I work in were quite lively. I really began to question what I was doing there. I didn't want to be so far away from my home, from the people that I really loved, especially as having two young kids. So it definitely, I can remember the day really. I closed my laptop with my wife, and decided, I'm done. It still took a year to transition away from that, by the way, but you get a lot of dependence on that sort of lifestyle and wage, to be honest. So yeah, it still took a while.
It's an interesting transition, and it's frustrating to me. It seems like it feels like you should have as high of a wage as possible when you're in serving your country. To me,
Yeah, I
but
guess so. Yeah, it's a good point. It's not something I've dwelt on. I think for me that yeah, you could argue that, but I see the same. My wife's a nurse. My sister-in-law's a teacher, and I think those guys as well provide such an important service
yeah,
to the foundation of our country. So I think it wouldn't be just for the armed forces. There's a lot of people that deserve to be looked after, both financially and emotionally as well, psychologically. I think it's just one of those things. And if we just went there for the money, we wouldn't do it. It's definitely a deeper calling or purpose to most of those jobs are quite vocational, aren't they? So yeah, there's a choice.
yeah, that's a good point. Hey, will you humor me for a speed round of questions?
Yes, go for it.
Awesome. Okay, are you a coffee or tea drinker?
I'm going to go with tea because I only allow myself coffee at the weekends now after I realized how much I was drinking, and so I try and limit that. So it's tea for me, and I'm English. So
You look like a really voracious reader. Do you have one book that everyone should read?
yeah, you can see from my
Yeah.
many leather bound books, as Mr. Burgundy would say. I think not one that leaps out at me. I love anything by Eric Newby or Ian Rankin, two very different writers. But yeah, Eric Newby is he's around. It's like in the 40s. He's an ex-military guy. He's got an incredibly beautiful way of writing, eloquently about all of his adventures. So it's a really interesting read. Eric Newby probably is up there, and then Scottish detective writing or series, a bit more thriller based. Ian Rankin, Rough and Ready from Edinburgh, and just all those descriptions of the bars and it's brilliant. I love it. So yeah, probably those two authors.
Do you read a lot? It looks like from your Instagram, you're always posting good book recs.
Yeah, definitely. Something that I started as a kid, and something that I think wherever I am in the world, I've always or nearly always had a book close to me, and it's only been a few days where I've not. So it's part of my habit, routine, whatever, just a few pages, even if I'm shattered, or just one page before I go to sleep is a way of finishing the day for me.
Yeah, that's how you know you're tired, when you just don't even get through one.
Yeah.
Walk out. Do you have a favorite go-to workout?
No, but if I was to pick something, it would be kettlebell swings and some form of pull-ups or press-ups or a combination of any of those three movements. I think you get most things done there between those movements.
If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh no, great question. I think the first person that's come into my mind is Mark Cavendish. He's the just broken the world record for the most amount of Tour de France wins. He's a sprinter, British cyclist. Just really strong character. Come back from so many injuries and setbacks, and keeps turning up. And this year he just broke the world record, or Eddie Merckx's record. So it probably Mark Cavendish. Just I'm fascinated by that sort of that drive.
Do you have any of your hobbies or interests that we didn't cover?
Oh, mountain biking I love. It's my absolute passion. I program that into my diary once, if not twice a week, even if they're short, sharp rides. Embarrassingly, just because I'm turned 45, puzzles have just started coming up. and plants. And that's probably it. Yeah, that's probably it at the moment, to be honest.
We got really into puzzles during quarantine, so I get it.
Good for I breathe a sigh of relief.
And the last question is, what's the best way for people to support you?
It's two ways really. Be themselves, and then if they want, what does that mean? Great question. Find out. Ask yourself some questions, or get somebody to ask you some questions, because I think who we are and what we are two very different things, but it's so easy to blur those two. So that's one side. And the other side, if people wanted a conversation, then feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to have a conversation and say hi. I mean, it's great when those little connections start to trickle through. So I guess that's
and your podcast, Forging Resilience, is worth a listen.
Oh, thank you. I'm very appreciative of that support. It's a great project for me personally. I really enjoyed it, learned a lot, and And yeah, I'm collecting episodes for season 2, which I guess in the end of the October, and I'll start rolling them back out. Out of curiosity, have you got any favorites, or does anything stick out in your mind from
I just
any
get
of the episodes?
so envious of you English people with your accents. It's so easy to listen to.
Just get AI to adapt yours.
I should dub over my reels. No, it's really good. And thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
No worries, appreciate it. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for reaching out, and it's been a pleasure to be here, Kip.
Huge thank you to Aaron Hill for joining this podcast. Again, I've linked his socials below. Please check him out, and be sure to hit like, follow, and subscribe. Stay tuned for future interviews.